A recent report reveals the South African economy could show some recovery between this year and next, but only if government prioritises investment, job creation and the power crisis. The report suggests global vaccination of vulnerable populations could set the stage for economic growth. Let's look at these findings with Luke Morawitz, Head of Information, one of the companies that put together the report, Euler Hermes. Very good morning to you, Luke. So let's start off with South Africa now, considering we've got the State of the Nation address tonight. What more did you find that will build the case that we're going to grow this year?
Good morning. Yeah, I think the premise of the report is obviously with the rollout of vaccines and the vaccination of the, should we say, at-risk sector of the population across the globe, approximately 20 to 40% of the population. We should see a rise in global GDP of approximately 4.6% this year. In terms of South Africa, we recorded an 8.2% drop in GDP in 2020. What we're forecasting is a 2.7% growth in GDP in 2021 and slowing down a little bit to 2.1 in 2022.
I like the words that you use, so I'm just going to jump in here. You say that the vaccine will supercharge Africa. I mean, those are quite powerful words. Obviously, as you say, access to it underpins it.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's unfortunate that the rollout in South Africa is having a bit of difficulty at the moment. I think if you compare the forecasted GDP figures for Africa as a continent in comparison to South Africa, we are forecasting a bit of a should we say higher bounce back for the continent as opposed to South Africa. That has to be borne in mind within the context of the debt situation that a lot of African countries actually find themselves in now. So we've already seen the likes of Zambia and Tunisia and Kenya having to go back to the IMF to ask for support. In many instances, South African African and South Africa in particular haven't necessarily had the same sort of monetary policy or the ability to print as much money as the likes of the United States or countries in Europe. So we've had to rely in many respects on debt to fund the rollout of vaccination programs and obviously to fund the acquisition of PPE for our health.
Okay, so as our fiscal space contracts in South Africa and other countries in Africa, what should we be looking at? I mean, obviously, investment, local and abroad, would be essential.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it needs to be borne in mind that in many respects, a lot of the sectors in South Africa have been very heavily hit by COVID. It's understandable. There are obviously some green shoots and some very positive stories. Agriculture is one example. With the rollout of the vaccines in our major trading partners overseas, we are expecting that most of their GDPs and most of their economies will start growing substantially and get back to pre-COVID levels by mid to late 2022. So hopefully in that respect, a lot of the manufacturing sector in South Africa will basically have their clients back at full capacity again. Tourism is obviously also something that's mentioned quite a lot. That's obviously a very huge driver of growth in South Africa. With all intents and purposes, it's going to be a bit of a long and hard road for that sector to come back quite strong. Optimistically, late 2021, but I have heard that many people are only forecasting that we get back to, again, pre-COVID levels by mid-2022 to early 2023.
Okay, and how do we deal with the growing disparities we're seeing in many other countries in Africa? And South Africa, here's a good point. So we've got some of the best scientists in the world, and yet for some people it's almost impossible to get to work because there are potholes in the road. I mean, infrastructure is key here, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the plans that government announced in September of 2020 are a step in the right direction. Unfortunately, there has been a habit of making grand gestures in terms of what is planned to get the economy up and running, and then I think in many instances we often fall short in actual implementation. The liberalization of power generation would be a fantastic first step. I think as most people in South Africa are well aware, obviously with level 3 load shedding, that's obviously incredibly disruptive. It's spending money on infrastructure. It's the longer term things are obviously very important, but it's the short-term games that we can potentially look at trying to make some sort of progress to clean our way back into the sort of levels in GDP growth that we need to actually start eroding unemployment. So I think that's quite frankly one of the biggest threats to South Africa at this point in time is the lower growth, but the continual rise in unemployment amongst South Africa.
Okay, well, thank you for injecting a little bit of positivity in which is a rather dire economic state here.